Okay, welcome everyone. We are recording now, and we want to welcome everyone wherever you are, whether it's the US, the UK, Spain, and other parts around the world. As we mentioned in the previous series, Ruth and I were inspired to run this series of events because we see a theme of a lack of confidence with our clients, and we wanted to try something new to empower women, and tying it to International Women's Day seemed like a great idea. And so far it's been working well. Our first topic was on confidence in general. Our second event last Friday was on mentoring and how that can build your confidence. And then today, obviously, we're talking about building your confidence by negotiating for what you want. So before we jump too much into it, just a few housekeeping issues. Everyone is muted upon entry. And if you're in a noisy place, please mute yourself as needed, but also feel free to unmute yourself to ask questions, share comments. The past two career conversations we've had have been very conversational, which has been great. Not only have Ruth and I been sharing conversation, but everyone on the call has been giving input. Mike has given a lot of great ideas and other people who have attended. So we'd love to continue that and would love you to chime in as well. We're gonna ask a few questions too throughout the talk today and have you respond to some questions that we've got for you. If you want to put something in the chat box, please just write to everyone is the most helpful because then everyone can see it. But if you don't want to ask it and have everyone see it, you can just write to host. I'll see it and I can share your question or your comment without saying who is asking. So with that, let's get started with introductions. I'm Paula Brand and I'm based in Annapolis, Maryland, and my background includes human resources, training, workforce development, and career advising. I've helped thousands of individuals on their career journey. And I'm so excited to be here today because as I've worked over the years with clients from lots of different age groups and different, from different backgrounds, I realize that my favorite group to work with is mid-career to executive women. And so moving forward, I'm really trying to focus on working with that population more and doing more events like this series for mid-career women. And if you want more about my official credentials, please go to paulabrand.com and click on About Me, and that can answer some of the things about my education and certifications and so on. On a lighter note, I would like to share that I love to travel. I've been to 25 countries and 5 continents. I love to learn, teach, connect others, and eat ice cream. And, and I know, Ruth, you mentioned last time your favorite flavor is chocolate. I'd say mine's probably peanut butter and chocolate. But let me, and I guess just one last thing is Ruth and I met at the Career Thought Leaders Conference in 2010 and saw each other every year, once a year. But that goes into, we've helped build each other's confidence and it culminated in doing this, co-hosting these events. And so you never know where networking will lead you. Let me ask Ruth to introduce herself and then we'll move on to the content.
Yeah, thank you, Paula. And it is wonderful when you think we met in 2010. We only really see each other face to face once a year, and but it always feels like, you know, it was just yesterday. And
yeah, it does.
Exactly. And when Paula approached me, said, "Oh, you know, why don't we do something international?" You know, I jumped at the opportunity. So thank you for that. And like Paula, I've been in the careers field for many, many years, almost 25 now, so a quarter of a century. And it is still an incredibly exciting place. Things are changing. And to be honest, I think there's never been a better time to negotiate salary. You know, we have access to a lot more resources and information, but also I think there's a lot of awareness, especially in the UK, but I think it's, you know, you look at the US, you look at European countries, Asia, I mean, everywhere, I think there's a, you know, growing awareness that there's a lot of inequality and that we need to, you know, make sure that women get the chance to play the role that they deserve to play. And I always found consistently with my female clients, more so than with my male clients, when it came to salary negotiation, there was this pause and this hesitation, and I really had to force my clients sometimes to negotiate. But when they did, I mean, we obviously prepared and practiced, but when they did, they got fantastic results. And I sometimes now even get emails, 5 years later, and someone says, "Oh, Ruth, you'd never believe it. You'd be so proud. I got a new job and I negotiated and I got X amount more." So I think once you break through this barrier and you realize you would have left money on the table and other perks on the table, I think people find it easier. So this is a topic very close to my heart. So thank you, Paula, for making this the highlight of our 3-part series.
You're welcome. Yeah, it's we were talking earlier on the call that I think it's going to be my new calling, is to, one way to ease the pay gap is to encourage women to negotiate. And that's something we're going to talk about today. And one thing, so Ruth and I have both noticed with our clients that women are less inclined to negotiate, but we've also found that this is not just our experience. It's not exclusive to our experience. There's a lot of research that supports that idea, that men are more confident than women in general, and that's across cultures, but then specifically with salary negotiation, it bears out as well. So let me share a few data points with you, and I'll move the slide to here. This is where we're going. These are going to be the 5 points that we discuss, and we have the future slides have some great resources for you that we'll go over. And once again, we will send you a copy of this recording and the PowerPoint. So you'll have all these links handy and you don't have to worry about writing them down. But some of my research showed that, and this is from salary.com, 84% of employers expect candidates to try to negotiate. So, I mean, a lot of times women think that, oh, well, they would have offered me more if they could afford more, and sort of trust that they're giving a fair first number, but that's not really the case. Most employers are not starting at the highest because they have expected that you will try to negotiate. And I read one statistic that said they've reserved about 10%. They could go about 10% higher than what they're first offering. But even though 84% of employers expect candidates to try, most don't. More than half of men and women don't try. 46% of men do try to negotiate on a regular basis, but only 30% of women do. And there's a great book called Women Don't Ask, and it's by Linda Babcock. And in her book, she finds that the price of not negotiating your first job can range up to $2 million by the time women are 60 years old. And it makes sense, because if you start out at a lower salary, and then a lot of times the next employer bases their offer on your past, which I don't agree with, and that's a whole other topic. There are some laws changing in the US about them being able to ask you your salary. But that said, it's happening. And so you could see where a lower starting point is going to, over time, mean a lower ending point, unless something happens in between. So before we get into tip number 1, I'd like to just ask the audience, and you could just unmute yourself or just type in the chat box, if you could just say yes or no, if you have ever tried to negotiate a higher salary. And that could be when you're in a job trying to get a higher salary. That could be a new job that you're getting an initial offer. But I would just be kind of curious to see, of the people on the call here, if anyone's tried. And I see yes, yes, yes. So that's great. So far, okay, 4 yeses so far. That's excellent. I know I have tried a couple of times with a new job and with getting a higher rate within a job. And both times it worked. One time was more successful, I got a higher rate, but both times I got more money. So thank you for sharing. So far there was no, and that's great. Let me ask a second question, which is, can you just type favorable or not favorable? Or you could just put fave, not fave for shortness. But let us know how it worked out. So we have 1 not favorable. And if you could share those people who said they did try to negotiate, I'd just be curious to see how well it worked. As I mentioned, in my case, yeah, go ahead, Ruth.
At the beginning, for me, it was not favorable, but then my boss changed and I went back in, and then they had actually paid me a bonus of all the months back where I didn't get the higher pay rise. So yes, it then turned out to be very, very favorable.
In the end, okay. So you said in the end it turned out favorable, and then we have 2 faves of the 4 people who commented, 2 faves and 1 not favorable. So there is research out there that women do get penalized sometimes for being more assertive. And that actually also could be a whole nother webinar. But there's research out there that says when we do, and Ruth alluded to this, we don't want to do it, but when we do it, we actually are pretty successful. And today what we're going to talk about is how to ensure success. Nothing's, I guess, ever guaranteed, but the more you prepare and the more you focus on these 5 tips we have for you today, the more likely you will have a favorable outcome. So thank you everyone for chiming in, and let's move on to number 1. And I'd like to ask Ruth if you could share some tips on figuring out how do you figure out what you want and what is negotiable.
That is a good starting point. So I think the most important thing is you have to do a lot of research, and this is what I hinted to when I say this is a fantastic time to be in salary negotiating, because you've got so many resources at hand, and we'll talk about that under point 3. But there is information out there. You can get a good insight into what one can expect. And to start with, you have to be very clear. First of all, what do you actually want? Most of my clients are very fixated on the actual salary, and I understand that. That is sort of, oh, I will go for this. Oh no, it doesn't pay enough, I won't go for that. And salary, in my experience, is really very flexible, because when you negotiate, there is often room. Not always, in the public sector, for instance, often it is a certain range, or there's a certain pay for a certain level, but there's always room to negotiate. And so the first one is really, it's not just the salary. It is obviously incredibly important, because your salary will impact on your pensions payments and all these things. So it is important, but think of the whole package, because if you just focus on the salary, then you limit yourself, because there might also be other things that are really important to you that are not salary. And so, for instance, it could be a start date. That if it's a new job you want to go for and you really need some time for other things in between, or you need to finish off a certain project, or start date, that's a very clear one. Your schedule, your travel time, remote working. More and more of my clients, they want to have 1 or 2 days working from home, because they know that's the time when they get a lot of stuff done and they don't have to commute. And more employers are, willing to negotiate on that, but then ideally, some of them would still want you to be in the office. So, is there some flexibility around that? In terms of flexibility, in terms of hours. I mean, I have a lot of clients who are carers, whether that is for children or elderly relatives, and they need flexibility, and that is sometimes even more important to them than getting the top salary. They might be happier with a medium salary, but the flexibility is absolutely crucial. Sign-on bonus, all these things. And there's obviously also something that that I think is really important. If you don't manage to negotiate now and achieve a higher level of salary or some of the perks, nothing stops you from making it very clear to negotiate, okay, I accept, for certain reasons you can't get higher in your offer, but, are you willing to, I want to renegotiate in 6 months' time. When you see me in action, you can see how well I've performed, and then get that in writing in the contract or in an email, so you have something to show for. Because if your boss changes in 6 months' time and your new boss as well, I never agreed to that. At least you have something to show for. Does that make sense, Paula, for starters?
It totally does. And also a few other things to think about that you could negotiate would be, fees. If you have say you're a licensed social worker and every year you have to pay $100 to keep your license up, or training, conferences, right? Learning things. And then of course, a new one that I've heard of recently is student loan payments. There's actually a website, and I'm going to blank on, it's got some clever name and I can't think, and it might just be US based, but it's a website that allows employers or other people to pay sort of down your loan. And so I've heard of people negotiating that, which is probably the newest thing I've heard of that's on the table for negotiation.
And I think, one thing that is really important to remember is from an employer's point of view, first of all, as you say, Paula, they will never give you the best offer first. They will, because, if they can save themselves some money and spend it on other things, they'll be delighted to do so. I mean, anyone who runs a business knows how that works. So we need to remember they will never give us the best offer first. The other thing is, from an employer's point of view, there are fixed costs, and there are, fixed costs that they can, and then there are project costs that they can write off quicker. So what I mean by that is, if it's a salary, it has impact on the national insurance they have to pay. It has impact on, in the US, the medical things they have to pay for, the insurance, but it's also about the pension scheme. So they're all, they're all costs that are long-term with them and that they're committing to. On the other hand, sometimes when they can't go higher, let's say they've gone a bit higher, but they can't go as high as you want, then you can think, okay, what are some one-off costs that they can get out of a different budget? For instance, training. A lot of my clients, if they can't get to the top that they want, we negotiate, say project management Prince 2 qualification or a coaching qualification, because it's a one-off cost for an employer that they can write off, but it doesn't have a long-term budgetary commitment. And so be clear about the long-term costs and the one-off costs, and can you build a package around your expectations that satisfies you, but that also satisfies the employer.
Sure, Ruth, that's actually a really good point, because you're right. Salary will affect lots of other things, and something like a sign-on bonus is a one-off, or paying for a conference, and there's usually more wiggle room with a one-off cost for the exact reason you're saying. Yep. Exactly. Let's move on to number 2, just in the interest of time, if that's okay.
Yeah, okay. I hope that was comprehensive enough for our audience, but let's go to number 2. And Paula, I wanted to ask you, and it's an interesting question, and how do you know how to leverage points, and what do you mean by that? Know your leverage points, you call it. I'm intrigued.
Okay, yes, let's talk about leverage, because that is a huge piece of negotiation. Before I do that, Sabira asked if I was referring to SoFi, and I think that is what it was called, which is the website that handles student loan payments. If you don't mind, Sabira, because I can't really do it while I'm hosting and my computer's, if you don't mind just getting the website and sharing it with everyone in the chat, the link, that would be awesome, because I'm pretty sure it was something Fi. It was, I wouldn't have guessed SoFi, but something clever like that. So thank you for that. Let's talk about leverage. And really, the definition, it could be a verb or a noun, but as a verb, it's to use something to maximum advantage. And it's really the key to being a good negotiator. And really, in salary negotiation, salary data is one of your biggest leverages, knowing what the market rate is. It's important to protect it at all costs. And I know it seems awkward when you're in a salary negotiation and the employer is trying to push you to say a number, but you really want to put off that as long as you can. And you might even want to keep it to yourself in terms of with your colleagues. So if you're a self-employed person like Ruth and I, we might share market rates or what we charge clients just to find out if we're in the ballpark. And that's slightly different. But if you are working for an employer and, say you innocently tell a colleague who's got a connection at the place you want to work, and you sort of innocently say, oh, well, I'd really love to get $80,000, but I would take 70 or something like that. You can't be 100% sure that person isn't going to share that. I mean, even if you ask, please don't share that. They might think they're doing you a favor, helping you get say they're having a conversation with their networking contact, and that person says, well, there's no way we can afford 80. Do you think this person would take 70? And then she says, yeah, I think they would, or something like that. The point is, you should really try to keep your salary data to yourself as much as possible, even among people who you consider friends and helping you get a job, because you can't really control what gets shared. And it's to your benefit and advantage to keep that information as confidential as possible, because that's part of your biggest leverage. So I know it sounds a little paranoid or overly protective, but Karen Chopra talks about this and harps this point to no end, that, you know, that is your biggest leverage. So don't give it up. And so let's talk about, I want to show this screen, and thank you, Sabira, for sharing sharing the website. So everyone has that in the chat right now to check out that website. This is a graph actually Karen Chopra created, and as you can see from the bottom, it's used with permission from her, and she has a great book called Coaching Career Clients on Salary and Other Workplace Negotiations, which I highly recommend if you do coach career clients. But even if you're someone who you consider yourself to be a job seeker, you can still learn from this book. It's short and sweet and to the point, and the information is true no matter what perspective you're reading it from. The steps are the same and how to prepare. But the powerful thing about this graph is that it really illustrates that you have the most leverage when they make the offer. And you can see it's glaringly obvious on this chart. You know, the first interview, the second interview, all those times you are not the preferred candidate yet. There's lots of other people they're looking at. They haven't fallen in love with you, so to speak. Even up till maybe a third, you know, you're having lunch with the boss, until they make that offer, you have zero to very little leverage. And so you've really got to hold off having that conversation until they make the offer. And if you don't go away with anything else today, hopefully you keep that in mind, because that is the most critical point in the salary negotiation. And then going to the point where Ruth made earlier, what if, you know, you might try to say, if it seems like the best way to, that they're being stubborn, they're not negotiating, they're saying this is the best they can do, you could try to say in 6 months, let's revisit this, and that might be your best tactic at the moment. But notice that your leverage goes way down. It's not as bad as it was when you were just one of maybe 10 candidates, but it still drops a lot. So the critical time, I always tell people, say you have a vacation planned for your anniversary and it's been planned for 3 years, and you get this job and the job starts a week before that vacation, you could either try to negotiate the start date or you could try to negotiate the vacation. But that's when you want to do it. And I personally I had to do this, where I got a job and there was a family vacation plan that had been planned for years. And in this job, it was pretty awful. You didn't actually even get vacation the first year. You had to spend the whole first year earning your 2 weeks. So this was like 10 years ago, and it was bad, but I had to take time without pay, but at least I got it. And when did I ask? I asked exactly when they were offering me the job. And if I had asked any sooner, it could have knocked me out of the running, because they thought, well, we'll just find someone who doesn't have a vacation plan. So know that that's when your best leverage is. The other types of leverage that you have would be if you have a unique skill set, like you have a license that's hard to find, or a credential like a CPA, or say you're like qualified to be the safety officer for a facility, and they're getting inspected soon by some regulator, and they have to have the safety officer position filled. Those are the types of things that could give you leverage. It could also be your background, your connections, especially for something like a sales position, where they know that you know all the clients that are potential clients, and so that's your leverage. So those are all things that you would bring, things to have to do with you that would give you leverage. The other things that might be more on the organizational side would be things like what I mentioned in terms of filling a critical position, having a tight time frame. Maybe the position's been open for a year and the workload is just piling up. Any of those things would give you leverage as well. So it's important before you go into the negotiation to think, what types of leverage might I have? Do I have? And some of that you're going to only find out by networking. Some of it you might find out, they might just share it nonchalantly, like, oh, we really want to get this position filled fast because it's been open for so long. They might sometimes give that up. and you've got to make sure you take those nuggets and put them in your pocket for future reference. But sometimes it's going to be talking to someone you know who works at the company, who knows that position has turned over 6 times in the past 2 years and that they're desperate for someone. It doesn't really matter how you get the information, as long as you try to get it, of course, in an ethical manner. So I guess it does matter how you get it, but as long as you get it in an ethical manner, it doesn't matter if you're getting it from one source or another.
Well, I have a question for you, because I work a lot with my clients on how they present themselves online, on paper. So, you know, we do make sure they have really strong CVs. And what I've really found is that my clients, because they have such strong marketing documents, and, you know, we have some resume writers on the call as well today, you know, I mean, Mike, I know you will agree with that. When you have a really strong proposition and you know already, you know, on paper, you look absolutely brilliant, and you are brilliant, and you go in with that confidence, and then you leverage all your USPs, that already gets them to a higher salary. I mean, I've had quite a few clients recently who the companies very quickly offered them even more than the top that they had given them in a, you know, in a band, because they were so keen to get them. Would that come under leverage as well? Like, you know, how you look on paper?
Yes, I mean, to me, I would call that your background, your connections, your reputation. Okay. Right. If you're known as the go-to person for project management in this city, and you're applying for a project management job in that city, and the employer knows that, which, right, could be from the paper you've presented, like in your case, you said the resume was top-notch, but it could also just be through word of mouth if you've done good networking, and you have someone inside the organization saying, you really need to hire this person. They really are the best, and don't insult them with a low offer. That's even better. But yeah, to me, that is leverage. That is leveraging your reputation as the go-to person.
Okay, great.
Yep.
Shall we see whether our audience, our listeners, have you got any questions about the leveraging part? Because I think that's a really important one that we don't talk about often enough. If you would like to unmute yourself and ask us questions or put them into the group chat.
Yes, I do have a question, and maybe you can help me out on that. You know, as a resume writer, how do you actually find out your market value, let's say?
As a resume writer?
As a resume writer, or let's take someone who's a freelance writer with their work. You know, how do you research that, define that?
Actually, it's funny because that's our next. You want to take that, Ruth? Because that's basically the next point.
I'll wait then. I'll wait.
No, that's okay. You're leading us right into it, Micah. It's a perfect question to lead us to the next, to researching market rate, whether it's a self-employed person or someone who wants to work full time.
Yeah. So let me talk a little bit about researching your market rate. And the first thing I want to say is, where I come from in terms of negotiations is that you want to create a win-win with your employer. So you're not trying to pull them over, or, you know, you don't want them to pull you in the wrong direction. For me, it is a win-win. At the end of the day, you want them, they want you, and you want to work together productively and happily, you know, after you've both signed on the contract. So that's my starting point. And that doesn't mean that you don't research, because, you know, the research piece for me comes in that you really understand, you know, what is a fair reward and what are you worth. And there's some fantastic tools out there. And we've got some in the resources, but I think first of all,
let me go to that slide. So that everyone's seeing that. Yep.
And there's pay scale. It's called pay scale. Global data. Indeed.com has global data, and it's interesting because, you know, some of these big job search sites like Indeed, I mean, I looked this morning and there are 500 million data points, because obviously they pull a lot of that information together because of all the jobs that they're posting out there all the time. So they go on the data, and you can do it for different countries. Glassdoor.com is the same. Glassdoor.uk.co.uk. I mean, Glassdoor is very big in the UK. Then we have salary.com. LinkedIn is also one. It's a little bit limited for the time being. And then there's the onetonline.org, which is US data. But the great thing is there is huge amounts of information out there. So you can put in Mike, and you need to just check that out. I mean, resume writer. I don't know whether they're enough for you in Spain to get some good data, but I'd go to the US, put in, get the US data and then translate it over to Spain. And it's also good to see, where the US would sit. So, you can put in your profession, you can put in your location, and then it gives you really interesting data, and it goes a lot deeper than just the salary. So that's why I said at the beginning of our session, there's never been a better time for salary negotiation, because we as job seekers have a lot of information at our fingertips and we need to use them. So these are sort of the pay scale, Indeed, Glassdoor, Salary, Own It Online, LinkedIn to some extent, but they will catch up in the long run. These are sort of very easy tools. You can do that in 5 minutes. It's also really important because in some countries, unlike the US and the UK, in some countries, I know this from my home country, Germany, they don't advertise salary in the job description, in the advertisement.
That's interesting.
You have no idea.
Is it against the law to do so, or it's just not the common?
It's just not the done thing. So you do not know, and so that's really difficult. So you need to do a lot of that research. In the US and the UK, we have it a bit easier because the salaries, unless it's at the top and they don't, but or they say a competitive salary, but the majority of jobs have either a band or a figure. So that's the number one thing. Do the research with those resources. But also, I'm a big fan of professional associations, and they put a lot of effort into establishing what their members earn. And the bigger ones, certainly, they publish that information every year or maybe every 2 years. But also, don't forget, other people. You will know people in your field that I apologize, that you know well enough.
Yeah. I'll pick up on that, Ruth, just to give you a second. Micah, I would say ask your other colleagues. So there's been times, maybe once a year, where I just contact local career counselors who do similar work to what I do. And you could do the same thing. You could contact resume writers in Spain, across the country, or maybe just within a 50-mile radius of you. Of course, not everyone's going to share that, because in some ways you're competitors, but you also can, if you've developed a relationship. I know 5 to 10 people in my local area who would be willing to answer that question, and I'm willing to share my rates with them. So I think you have to be willing to give information. And this goes back to what I was talking about very earlier, that you don't want to give it to everyone all the time, but this is a specific situation when you're self-employed. And I think that you calling 10 resume writers who operate near you is going to generate much more realistic and powerful information than any of these websites, just because resume writer is not a standard full-time job at a company. And most of all of these websites are not focusing on self-employed businesses. So I think that's
what I was wondering. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting. A client of mine, she actually asked in a LinkedIn group, I'm new to the field. I'm negotiating. Is there anyone in the group who would be happy to talk to me offline? And she got 2 responses. So, obviously they didn't discuss it in the group, but, they connected and they had a conversation. So it's asking people, and I cannot just apologize for this interruption. I don't know why that is, because I switched my phone off, but my Mac is obviously trying to be over.
When you have the Mac open, it still rings. I know exactly what you're talking about. It's very annoying. Yep, it's because your Mac is open.
Yeah, but research, so that you get a point, what is information out there. But I think what's also really important for yourself is, I think you have to come up with 3 numbers yourself. So based on all that research, you need to really think, okay, what would be the top number that I would be over the moon and couldn't wait to start tomorrow, get that opportunity? What is the top value? What is the medium value that you'd be really happy and satisfied with? And what is the bottom number where you say, I'm walking away? And you really need to think about that even before you go for interview, because these questions will come up sometimes really, really early. What salary do you have in mind? So you need to really be clear what would be absolutely brilliant, maybe a little bit unrealistic, but that would be absolutely fantastic. And often people can get it, but you have to have that number, what is that top number? What is that middle number that you're still motivated enough to start? Because no employer wants you to feel so disappointed that you then start without any motivation on Monday morning. That doesn't make any sense. And if they don't see that, then I think they're the wrong employers in the first place. And what is the number that you say, with due respect, but that is just below my expectations and I'm walking away. So these 3 numbers you have to know.
Yep, exactly. Before we move to number 4, which we should do sooner than later, just looking at the time, does anyone in the audience want to share any other resources they know about to research market rate? And if so, do you mind sharing in the chat or unmuting yourself to share it?
So for example, something that I did a few years ago was convert myself into a mystery shopper. When I was very new to the writing industry. So I asked a friend, give me your resume and I'll give you all the sites and just ask for an offer and how the work process is. So that's how I researched my market, at least at the national level. Maybe that would work for some other self-employed people as well.
Yeah, I love that, Micah. That's actually a really clever way to do the same thing I was suggesting, but the way I was saying it, you're coming in as a colleague and saying, can we share rates? So I'm doing a market rate survey. Your way is actually way more clever because you don't even have to get into the whole competition and awkwardness of it because you're acting as if you would hire them. You could even have your friends really do it, right? Maybe they really do want their resume.
I did actually. I did. And they had it done and I was just totally shocked about the quality. So there you go.
Okay, right. There is that. You often get what you pay for. That's true. Yeah. Let's see. Someone else says, is it possible to shoot oneself in the foot and ask for way too high that annoys the employer? It is possible. And actually someone else had written in a question ahead of the workshop that was similar and asked, when do you know when to keep pushing or stop negotiating? So I think they're along the similar lines. I think that's why it's really important to negotiate in person or over the phone. Again, referencing Karen Chopra, she absolutely emphasizes that you never do this through email or voicemail. And a lot of people want to do it because it's less confrontational and it's easier seemingly to do it through email because you're not putting yourself in that heat of the moment situation. But she emphasizes that it's so important for that real-time feedback. And I would agree from my own experience that you need to, how would you sense that they are getting annoyed? Well, their voice would become harsher. They might cross their arms if you're in person. So I think it's possible, but if you've done your research and your homework, you know what the top range is. And so you're probably not asking for 20% above the top rate, unless you have so much leverage and you know this. So I think that you have to watch body language and nonverbals, verbals, and if you sense that they're getting annoyed, you might back off a little bit, or maybe you drop the salary negotiation and move on to something like your next most important thing, like telecommuting, or something that's less going to annoy them less because it costs them nothing to
Paula, I would say you always have to make a business case. In your own mind, and you have to be able to argue your case. And I think, yes, there is a danger if you go way above what is realistic or what is paid for. Or sometimes you have employers who always pay top dollar anyway, and you've got employers who deliberately stay in the middle, but they offer other things. So you will always have to find that out from research. But I think, of course, you don't want to come across as too unrealistic or naive if you go totally over the top. So do your research, be ambitious, because I think, to be honest, the tendency is that we ask for not enough. It's very, very rare that we go the wrong way in terms of highest salary. I think we're much more likely to undersell ourselves or have lower expectations. And then there's one point I wanted to make about this other question that came in. I think one of the most important things is, and that comes back to this creating a win-win situation, is be clear what you want to negotiate on and do it in one go. You know, sometimes I have clients who want one thing and then they get that and then, okay, now go for the next thing. And I said, don't do that, you know, because you become like a pain in the neck for an employer. You know, you want to be clear, okay, this is what's important to me. This is what I think I deserve because of X, Y, and Z, and this is what would make it really work for me. And you put it on the table, you know, the salary, the flexibility, whatever. That would be my, if you say, okay, I get the salary, and then a week later you go, oh, now I want the flexibility, and then a week later, now I want this. I mean, this sounds crazy, but there are people out there who would like to negotiate that, and I think that just creates a really, really difficult situation. Because
I agree.
Whatever you do, you need to be clear. If you get that job and if you say sign on the dotted line, you really want to be able to go in to an employer and start on a good, you know, on good terms. But that doesn't mean that you have to ask for less than you're worth.
Right. Totally agree, Ruth. And that kind of leads us into tip number 4 about handling the offer. So if you don't mind, I'm just going to jump into that.
Yes, you do. Yeah.
So I would add to what Ruth said that you want to prioritize what is most important to you. Is it the salary? Is it the telecommuting? Is it them sending you to a conference? And also agree with Ruth that you want to get it all done in that same conversation. You should, in your preparation, have already thought about what is, you have prioritized your asks one by one, and you may never get to number 5. And that's fine, but you have the order that you want to negotiate in, and once you get one thing, then you can ask for number 2. Or if you sense that they're getting very annoyed that you even maybe asked for negotiated the first point, maybe you back off on some of the others. But you definitely want to have that order of preference in your pocket, because each time, at each leverage point or each ask that you get or don't get, your leverage decreases the more you ask. So you have to ask the most important things first and then go accordingly from there. Some other tips for just handling the offer: don't say yes right away. A lot of times people are just so excited that they just say yes, or they might not even say yes, but they might say something like, okay, that's great, which is interpreted as you just accepted it. So be careful to stay poised, but friendly. Make sure you stay friendly. Ask for the offer in writing. You always want to try to get it in writing. And ask for the benefit details, because they could say that they are giving you health insurance, but when you look at the rates, they're basically making you pay the full amount or something like that. So things might not look as good, or they could look better. But you definitely want to get that information in black and white so you can evaluate it. Ask them when they want you to get back, because sometimes I worked for one employer, they would always make the offer like Thursday night, and then you had to tell them by Friday night, and then orientation started Monday morning. And so they basically gave you 24 hours and that was it. So different employers are going to give you different amounts of time. And if they want an answer this minute, that would sort of put a red flag in my head. Like, why is it so urgent? But that could happen. And the next step would really be preparing for the conversation itself, which leads us to number 5. And maybe, Ruth, we can end on you sharing with us why it's so important to practice.
Yeah, and just one little thing, and I think we talked a lot about salary, but I think one thing you always have to bear in mind is, you know, it's where are you going with that salary in terms of, you know, location. If it's about a job in a different city that you do not know, a different country, it's really difficult.
Right, good point.
You know, how expensive, I mean, how far will that salary take me? I mean, you know, whether you are in New York or in, I don't know, in the middle of Texas or in the middle of Arizona, you know, money will go, you know, further in one area than the other. And we found a really good tool. I tested it out today because it's global, and it's called Numbeo, N-U-M-B from number, numbeo.com. And I got very excited because I can put in New York and London, and they give me really detailed information. And you know, about salaries and about costs, living costs. I mean, from cinema ticket to a meal in a restaurant, so that you really see how far would that salary actually stretch, depending on where you go. Because salary, you know, and living costs, it's so connected, and we wanted to make that very clear. And then the thing about, you know, how do you handle the offer and how you do this whole salary negotiation, I think you just have to really practice. And for me, first of all, you can script things out. Not that you want to read from a script if you do it on the telephone, but, you know, just going through the different processes, you know, through the different stages, through the different factors, you know, you become very clear on what it is that you really want and need. And also, you know, where are you prepared to negotiate on or make compromises. And the most important thing for me is not only that you write some of these things down, we've given you some resources for scripting it, but also you have to say it out loud.
Mm-hmm.
So important, you know. There's one thing about, you know, what I think I'll say is this, and actually saying it. And I want you to practice it. I mean, I practiced quite a lot when I started raising my fees, because I thought, really, you know, and yes, and my coach said, Ruth, you need to practice in front of a mirror until it becomes just normal and you don't hesitate, because that's what you are worth. And the last tip, and that is from Jack Canfield, who's, you know, one of the gurus in the self-improvement arena. And years ago, he taught us on the webinar, when you ask for something, you have to ask with the expectation that they will say yes. And that's a really interesting one. I've practiced that a lot, you know, in smaller situations, like, I don't know, you know, I want something from someone in a shop or whatever, or someone changed, you know, I want to go to the toilet in a restaurant, you know, and you go in, and normally I would have said, oh, is there any chance I can use the toilet? And then I'll leave it open for them to say no. Now I'll go in and say, no, you know, where are the toilets, you know, and I just know my voice and my tone and my whole body language says I'm expecting it, and they can't say no, and they rarely ever do. And I think there's a huge thing about saying these things out loud. You know, what does it feel like when you say, my idea of this, you know, of my starting salary would be $90,000, when you've been maybe on 65 or 70,000 before, you know, and it's a major jump for you, and you have to say, like, it's natural and you deserve it. And I cannot stress that enough. Paula, in terms of scripting, have you got any tips? Because you do this with your clients, don't you?
I do, and I think that practicing, whether it's us or helping our clients, practice is essential, because, like you said, it's one thing to read it and write it out loud, but when you actually say it, the more you say it, it's just like giving a speech or even just any other question in an interview. The more you've practiced it, the more naturally it will come out, the more confident you will sound. And when you practice in a mirror, you'll see that, wow, I said that, but I really didn't look very confident, or I'm smiling as I'm saying it, so I don't look like I'm serious, things like that. So I just agree with you that practicing, looking in a mirror, practicing with another human being are all really important. And then just memorizing some phrases, like, that's good to know. That's a really good phrase that can get you through a lot of things without, you know, if they say, well, our range is normally such and such, that's good to know, right? You didn't say, I agree with you, oh, I'll take that, or that's low, or that's high. That's good to know. So that's a good phrase that can get you through a lot of salary negotiation points. Even when they offer you the position, you can say, oh, that's great. Well, actually, that might get you a little trouble, but that's good to know. I'm so excited that you've about the possibility of working with you. So you haven't really committed. You're sort of laying the foundation that a negotiation is about to begin. And then embracing silence. A lot of times we shoot ourselves in the foot because we can't stand the silence. And so we give more information than we should, or we already backtrack the thing we just asked for before they even have said yes or no, because we're scared that the silence means that a no is coming. But don't predict a no before you get a no. So those are just some other tips, I would say, Ruth, in terms of time, we're at 12:49, or you're probably at 4:49.
Yeah.
I would say that let's open it up to the audience. I understand if some people have to go in terms of time, but let's open up to audience for any questions, comments, and before we do that, just to make sure if we lose anyone during this time frame of Q&A, that I just want to thank everyone on behalf of Ruth and myself for attending today, sharing your ideas, and also some of you have been on all three of our calls and have really provided some great insights and resources. So just want to say thanks. We will follow up with an email where you'll get the PowerPoint for this presentation, you'll get the recording for the event, and with that, let's open it up, Ruth, and continue the conversation, you and I, or if anyone else has any other comments to share or questions. Okay, someone said it's been useful. Thanks, you're very welcome. There was someone who wrote some questions up ahead of the event, but I think we've really answered them all. They asked, what are the best resources for compensation, understanding, and I think we've shared some here. And we talked about, it asked, when do you ask for vacation time or other benefits? And as we said before, at the time of the offer, because that's when you have the most leverage.
And often you find that companies invest more and more into their web pages and the careers information. So yesterday I was working with a client, she had no idea of the benefits, and we just went on the website, looked, and there was the whole benefits package that they offer on 2 pages as a downloadable PDF, and it was just such a good preparation for negotiations because it's very clear what is there. And that was really comprehensive. So I would always say check the company website as well, because it's more and more in the interest of employers to be transparent about what they offer. Because don't forget, it's a competitive market out there. I think it's turning into more of a job seekers, buyers market when you compare it to just a few years ago.
I would agree, and yeah, that's a great point. And I should add that for future reference to when you're doing the market rate research. Sometimes job postings from a company, sometimes they give information, but sometimes just their own website, especially like you said with benefits, because a lot of those things don't change. Yes. And so they can say it. I mean, either they have Kaiser Permanente or Blue Cross, and that's that, and that's not going to change no matter what salary you negotiate, no matter what level you are in the organization. They might not put the rates up, but there's definitely going to be some information there that's applicable to everyone. And then that saves you having to ask in the negotiation about it. And it also makes you look more prepared that you actually found this information ahead of time, even though it might be public and on their website. Probably most people don't go there and prepare themselves with that. So that will say something about you as a candidate.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay, so nothing is coming up in the group chat in terms of questions.
Paula and Ruth, this is Sabira.
Yeah, hi, Sabira.
Hey, thank you for the session. This has been really great. But I just wanted to share, because it just happened whilst the webinar was going on. I actually had a client earlier this week. He received an offer originally at 60, nowhere near where he would have liked to be. We coached on sharing what he wanted to be at that time he received the offer, and that was a verbal offer. He then received the written offer, which what they did was they changed his job title to a senior level. And it went from 60 to 75 or something like that. But this still wasn't, where my client felt comfortable. So I coach him on, well, let's write a response to that offer letter. So we talked about, thanking him for the offer letter and the increase of title change and so forth. And would it be possible to have a conversation? And these were the areas that he wanted to talk about. So he just actually emailed me like a couple of minutes ago. So on top of that 75, he got another 3,000 plus a bonus.
Right.
Like a sign-on bonus, like a one-time?
No, this is an annual bonus
Okay.
that yes, they get it, if the company does well. So it's not a performance eval bonus. It's, you know, based on how the company does.
Yeah.
Excellent.
So, you know, he left with, I'm going to take the weekend to think about it, and that's kind of where we are with that. So I just wanted to share that, because that kind of goes back to that leverage piece of, you know, at the time of offer, after the letter offer, and then, you know, another conversation after that too.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. That's a great story, and also a good example that everything's negotiable, including title or level of responsibility. So I've seen people do that with, to negotiate the higher salary, they're willing to manage a team of 5, whereas like the initial offer was not being a supervisor to the team, it was being part of the team or something like that. And in this case, your client did something similar where he negotiated the title, because sometimes
that one, actually, he didn't even negotiate the title. That just came because, you know, the 60 was so far below what he's currently making. And I think they saw that, and I think they were trying it on to begin with. You know, that came without an ask.
Wow, that's great. But sometimes they do have bands, and if you're, you know, if you're a manager, you're going to make this range, and a director, you're going to make this range. So sometimes, in order to give you the higher salary, it sounds like what happened in this case with your client, they had to make it a different title. I had a similar experience where I was negotiating a raise, and what I was looking for was like about $10,000 more. I didn't get that. I got about $5,000 more. But even to do that, I had to have a title change. So I became the lead of the people who were my colleagues, as opposed to being one of the colleagues. And that made sense because it was fair, right, in terms of equality, but also I had more responsibility, so it justified the higher pay. And so that could be, that's definitely something to consider, is the title. And that could also be, say you got the, you didn't get the salary you wanted, but you still really want the job. You might negotiate a fancier title just to get something that you want out of it. Like you'll take the lower salary because that higher title will give you other things.
And the title will also is an investment in the future, because the title is more important than we would want them to be, because, you know, it sets you up for the next position after that already, with a certain expectation that comes with the title. So well done. Great. And it goes to show, you know, you never get the best offer first. That's so.
Yeah, it sounds like your client had to work really hard for that.
Right.
Fantastic. So I just realized we have some British colleagues coming on, and I'm so sorry because they're coming on expecting our session, but because of this unprecedented time difference between the US and the UK and springtime changes, I'm afraid we're coming to the end, but you will get the recording. So I'm just sorry that, you know, you weren't able to join us from the beginning at 4 o'clock UK time. Can I also say thank you to Paula? She has put huge amounts of effort into that. It was her idea, and I was delighted when she approached me and said, can we do this together as an cross-Atlantic collaboration, because we live in a global world, and it's been an absolute delight to work with Paula and have you all come and join us. So as far as I'm concerned, have a wonderful weekend, and let's see where this takes us, and good luck with your salary negotiations.
Yep. Thanks, Ruth. It's been a pleasure working with you too.
Take care.
Thank you to you too as well, and for the series. It was really a great idea.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for that feedback, Micah. And Ruth, it was fun to have a partner in crime. So it was definitely more fun to do with someone, and it helped to make me more accountable. And so we kind of had some peer mentoring going on as we went through this process, right? So excellent. Thanks, everyone. Have a great weekend wherever you are in the world.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.